Do you cook, too?
Nothing fancy, just plain home cooking.
I'll bet you could boil a terrific pan of water.
I like the movie Stage Door a lot. So when I heard the original authors hated it, I decided to investigate why. I started by reading the original play. Oh boy. I can see why Edna Ferber and George Kaufman were miffed. Hollywood took their play that shat on the film industry and not only made it funnier, but more meaningful as well. Honestly, I'd be galled too. Stage Door is a 1937 comedy based off of a 1936 play. It stars Katharine Hepburn, Ginger Rogers, Adolphe Menjou, and Andrea Leeds. It was directed by Gregory La Cava and is about the women of a theater boarding house struggling to make it during the Great Depression. Now, before I get into the compare and contrast of these two stories, I think a little background is necessary. Edna Ferber and George Kaufman were the original writers of the play, while Maury Rinskin and Anthony Wheeler adapted it for Hollywood. It is important to note 3 out of these 4 players were members of the Algonquin Round Table, a group of highly influential New York humorists who gathered together in the Algonquin Hotel to eat lunch and collaborate on works of art and snobbery. This coming from Edna Ferber herself, who referred to them as the Poison Squad. Quote, "They were actually merciless if they disapproved. I have never encountered a more hard-bitten crew, but if they liked what you had done, they did say so publicly and wholeheartedly." Which was nothing to scoff at. People in the US paid attention to them during the 1920s, especially in theatrical circles. They were often quoted in newspapers and wrote articles for magazines like Dorothy Parker for Vanity Fair and Harold Ross, founder of The New Yorker. But that was the 1920s. The Great Depression kind of put the kibosh on a lot of their shenanigans. Productions on Broadway went from 233 in 1929 down to 98 in the span of 10 years. As a result, thousands of actors, set designers, costumers, directors, and writers found themselves without work, while others simply shifted their talents to Hollywood. There they filled a high demand for experienced bodies able and willing to work on movie productions, especially with the advent of talkies. Synchronized sound paired with moving pictures pushed a lot of silent film stars out of the limelight. As voices failed to match audience expectations, there was a higher demand to get new ones, better ones, practiced ones.
Ta-tay-tee-to-too.
But while film had been around since the late 1800s, studios really didn't start to become a thing in Hollywood until 1911, with the Big Five solidifying their conglomerate status in the 20s. So while the medium of theater had been around since the 6th century BCE, movies had only been popular for about 15 to 20 years in the 1930s. To the point, many in the Algonquin Round Table didn't think of it as an art at all. So when Hollywood started actively recruiting people out of the theater, it's not surprising that Ferber and Kaufman found this highly predacious, a cheapening of the quality demanded by live performance in exchange for censored, mass-market, multiple-take product that Hollywood was churning out in droves and selling in cans across the country. Which, to a certain extent, was true, but made keeping lines from their play like this impossible for the film. Enter Maury Rinskin and Anthony Wheeler. Rinskin was also a member of the Algonquin Round Table, but didn't appear to hold the same snobbish views on Hollywood. If he did, it didn't stop him from moving there in 1935, where he began writing screenplays. Presented with Ferber and Kaufman's work, Rinskin and Wheeler promptly stripped the play of all of its anti-Hollywood sentiments and found it had no plot. Seriously. So, what is the play about? Well, it follows the women of the Footlights theatrical boarding house, but focuses primarily on Terry Randall. Terry is a talented stage-struck actress, but desperate to get a job. Any job, but the only ones offering with any kind of consistency are from Hollywood. Her first offer comes from her roommate Jean Matlin, who accepted a contract and urges Terry to do the same. Terry refuses, and it causes a bit of a rift between the two, right as Jean leaves to make it big in Hollywood. The second comes from Mr. Kingsley, a movie man who sees Terry and wants her for a bit part. This coming on the heels of her not-so-starving artist boyfriend Keith writing a play and selling out to Tinseltown. Terry almost follows suit, but asks Mr. Kingsley to decide for her. Once a theater man himself, Kingsley is so infatuated with Terry's talent that he tells her to stay on the stage. And she does. A year later, Keith returns and tries to bully Terry into Hollywood and marriage. Right in front of Mr. Kingsley. The boys get into it and Terry tells them both off, but Mr. Kingsley returns with an impromptu audition that goes so poorly he quits his career in California to defect back to the true art, buying a play and promising Terry the lead. Oh, but not because she's his girlfriend now. No, never that. The end. Oh, and some other stuff happens to other characters that's actually way more interesting than Terry, but given this is where the majority of the play's focus lies, I followed it. Yes, this is going to be much longer. I apologize for nothing. The movie starts with Roger's character, Jean Matlin, yelling at her roommate for stealing her stockings. The interaction reveals several things about the characters, primarily that Jean doesn't care for decorum and that Linda Shaw has a sponsor called Mr. Powell. After the exchange, Jean no longer has a roommate. Enter Katharine Hepburn's character, Terry Randall, to fill the void. Unlike the rest of the girls at the Footlights Club, Terry hails from money, making her an outsider and a target for ridicule, especially when she waxes rhapsodic about Shakespeare at the dinner table and flat out tells the other girls that they aren't doing enough to get hired. Needless to say, she's not very well liked. Sympathetic to her self-created plight is one Kay Hamilton, as portrayed by Andrea Leeds. Kay is a seasoned thespian who is more than a bit down on her luck, but is willing to educate Terry to the mentality of the rest of the boarders. Terry is appreciative of the advice, but unconvinced, and thus she enters a bet with a couple of the other girls that by sheer force of will she can see a theater manager. One Mr. Powell, to be exact. Linda Shaw's sugar daddy. Kay is also at the office, not to witness Terry's efforts, but to try out for a role in a new play she feels she's perfect for, until she passes out from lack of food. Outraged at her friend's shoddy treatment by the manager's apathy, Terry storms into Mr. Powell's office to give him a piece of her mind, which she does, and is offered a job afterwards, because life is totally fair that way. Only it's not a Hollywood spin, but a good old-fashioned nepotism, all of which is unknown to Terry, including the fact that Kay was gunning for the same part. During rehearsals, it becomes apparent to everyone involved how utterly wrong Terry is for the role. Still, her father's money prevails, and everybody braces for disaster come opening night. And disaster does strike, but of a very different variety. Terry's grief allows her to tap into the pathos of the character and give a performance that would have done Kay proud. At a terrible and uncomfortable cost, the girls of the Footlights Clubs are united, but constantly moving forward because they have to be. Thus, a new girl enters the Footlights, and the cycle seemingly starts anew. It's a wonderful message, and I love it. However, if there's one glaring problem with this version, it's Jean Matlin's story arc. This is a character that exists solely to put butts in the seats, as Ginger Rogers portrayed her. Unlike Hepburn, Rogers was a shining star in 1937 thanks to the popularity of her films with Fred Astaire. And while words cannot describe how much I love her character, quips can't blind me to the fact that Jean has little function outside of comic relief. That and to highlight how big of an asshole Mr. Powell is, as if his indifference to Kay wasn't bad enough. Anyway, Mr. Powell first spots Jean at rehearsals, and he approaches her. She clearly has no interest in him, and rather than taking the hint, Mr. Powell wields his considerable influence to get Jean a job at a nightclub that he is partial owner of. Why? So he can schedule another run-in with her. Red flag number 1. Jean sees Mr. Powell with Linda and realizes what he's done. He invites her to dinner, and she accepts despite Linda, who gives her this delightful warning.
But you'll get to know him much better, and he's very deaf. You really won't have to bother to scream for help.
Red flag number 2. The night proceeds as Linda predicts, with the added fact that Jean is incredibly drunk. But does Mr. Powell stop plying her with champagne? No. Red flag number 3. Mr. Powell gives his butler this look. Red flag number 4. Alone, he promises her fame and fortune at the low price of staying with him. But because she is so soused, Jean thinks he means marriage. He's freaked out and immediately ceases and desists all pursuit of Jean to give her the bum's rush, all of which is played for laughs. All the red flags. I can easily see how this would have been funny in 1937, but in 2020, it's not, and Mr. Powell's actions scream date rapist. Trigger warning. To be clear, date rape is defined as sexual assault of a person while on a date and often involves drugs or alcohol. When plied with enough of one, the other, or both, victims become incapable of giving consent. So, how much is enough? Well, that's a subject of much debate and really should be taken on a case-by-case basis. However, in the instance of this fictitious man, I will be acting as judge, jury, and executioner, and I find him very much guilty of wanting to commit date rape. Is that a crime? No. Should it be? Again, no, because if we start convicting people of wanting to commit crimes, I'd be locked up 500 times over for homicide alone. Revenge! But given Linda's testimony and personal experience with Mr. Powell, I'm sure if we conducted an audit of his past sexual partners, there would be enough evidence to convict him. So, to head the trolls off at the past, just because Jean was warned of Mr. Powell's behavior does not make her responsible for it. Remember, his advances didn't stop the more incoherent Jean became. If anything, they got more intense. He only stopped when she mentioned marriage, and that is not okay. So when he tries the same routine with Terry, I get a little giddy thrill at how quickly she sees through it and forces Jean to the wrong conclusion. Jean then dumps him, and that's the entirety of her story arc. Not that the play is great in its treatment of Jean either, but it is better. In the play, Jean is a vivacious, if talentless bit of TNA tapped to go to Hollywood.
Phrasing?
She makes it big and is gone for most of the play, during which time her friends trash talk her by saying she can't act. But never Terry. Terry, in comparison to the other boarders, is a shining example of a stage actress. While others give up, get distracted, or try shortcutting their way to the stage through Hollywood or sex or both, Terry stays committed to her work. She wants to earn her audience, which is commendable, but the message is severely undercut when Terry accepts a role without proving she's a good fit. Let's backtrack. When Terry auditions for the play, she blows it, which is fine. She wasn't given a lot of time to prepare, the guy conducting it was a jerk. It happens. But then Mr. Kingsley purchases the play and gives her the lead. True, Mr. Kingsley has seen her perform before, but the audience hasn't. Plus, their getting together right after makes me question his objectivity.
No, I'm not the type of guy that puts on a play just so he's good who can act in it.
Yeah, I don't care. I'm still questioning it. When Terry accepts, she no longer feels like the paragon actress the play has built her up to be because she's now knowingly getting ahead through her boyfriend.
Phrasing?
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Phrasing.
Unless you've been preaching about the artistic superiority of an industry without actually showing it.
Look, the theater is something that's gone on for hundreds and hundreds of years. It's part of civilization.
If Ferber and Kaufman had just dumped the romantic plotline or had Terry nailing the audition but still being rejected, their play could have very easily maintained the moral high ground it was advocating. But they didn't. Whereas the movie shows Terry profiting from her father's meddling, but we see her rising to the occasion. Nepotism sucks, but it is forgivable if the person profiting from it doesn't know it and is a good fit. The audience knows Terry is because we're given proof. We've seen the before, and this is the after. La Cava filmed Hepburn scenes on a closed set, then showed the cast to capture their actual reaction. That never happens in the play. We're just told Terry will be good and curtain, which is frustrating because no matter the flavor of writer, show not tell still applies. If you want to convince an audience of something, show it to them. Give an example of Jean being a bad actress. Show me Terry being good. Don't just say it, otherwise I'm going to make my opinions known 84 years later. Moving on. Kaufman may have been the king of the wisecracks, but his lines have nothing on this movie's dialogue. It just crackles. And that is because the actresses involved were comedians who, under the encouragement of La Cava, riffed their lines during rehearsals in front of a studio stenographer. The best ones were then added to the script, creating a dialogue that is so beautifully scathing, it baffles me how this...
And I used the right knife and fork. I hope you don't mind.
All you need's the knife.
...isn't as well known as this.
Yes, I wish you hadn't done that, Hildy.
Done what?
Divorce me. Makes a fella lose all faith in himself. Almost gives him a feeling he wasn't wanted.
Oh, now look, Junior, that's what divorces are for.
The closest we get to this kind of back and forth banter in the play is when Judith makes snide remarks at Keith. It's hilarious because he deserves it. But the majority of the play's humor is situational, like when a bedroom window is open and a flood of New York noise and neon lights comes rushing in, forcing the girls to wear eye shields and shout over the din to say goodnight. It's a small detail, but one that I'm happy to see that the movie kept, as it is a reminder to the audience that they're not living it up. So kudos to Ferber and Kaufman for thinking of that. I enjoyed it. Speaking of things I enjoyed, Andrea Leeds being nominated for an Oscar. This performance is hands down one of the strongest elements the movie has going for it. Not a lot of changes were made to Kay's storyline, but those that were are significant, like making her a primary character and spending more time with her so that audiences develop an emotional attachment beyond pity. Don't get me wrong, it's still the primary emotion that the writers want you to feel for Kay, but by changing her status from newcomer to proven actress, it makes her so much more sympathetic, especially in regards to her treatment of Terry. Why? Because even though Terry accepted a role Kay needed, Kay never tells her, never makes her feel guilty, and never stops being kind. Hell, Kay even gives Terry acting advice, making this line so incredibly heartbreaking.
Oh, I don't know why I'm hanging on. Except there's nothing else I can do, and no one I can go back to. Except someone I'll never go back to.
It's changes like these that make me believe Rinskin and Vaylor knew what they were on about. Using light touches to sell Kay's backstory, they're not begging the audience for sympathy when Kay alludes to the trauma of her past. Rather, the writers are inviting curiosity. Thus, when she reveals that she's lived the part, we pay attention. It's set up. For this line, this scene, painting a picture of devastation so complete that if you have a heart, you can't help but feel it breaking as it leads us to this piece de resistance, Kay climbing the stairs while falling into madness. Leeds plays this beautifully. Throughout the entire film, we've seen her putting on airs of false cheer with the occasional slip. But this is something else entirely, as we see her disconnecting with the world and for the first time, looking genuinely happy about it. I love it. And Terry is key to all of this. So when I read that Katharine Hepburn didn't like this role because she thought her character entirely pointless to the plot, I was baffled. At least she tried to educate herself by going to the director. Unfortunately, La Cava didn't know what Terry's purpose was either, which is an indictment to the studio system if ever I've heard one. Still, hindsight is 20/20. This movie is a fantastic allegory for the Broadway-Hollywood relationship of the 30s. Think about it. Kay is a talented actress, but out of work due to the Depression. She is the embodiment of Broadway. Then, all of a sudden, in steps this new kid. She's not particularly talented, but comes from money, is good-looking, and doesn't know how things work yet, so she doesn't know she can't do them. No one takes her seriously in the Footlights Club because she's unproven and a bit of a snob, aka Hollywood. Kay is struggling to get by, but sees Terry and helps her out by giving her the benefit of her experience. Broadway trickles into Hollywood. Terry supplants Kay for the role. Film becomes the dominant form of entertainment in the US. Kay bows out and subsequently is the driving force propelling Terry to greatness. Hollywood is triumphant and Broadway is dead. Or so it must have seemed in the 1930s. But Broadway didn't go away. While Hollywood made huge stars of actors seemingly overnight, they disappeared just as quickly, whereas that wasn't the case in the theater, because it offered its stars the one thing Hollywood couldn't: the stage door, a tradition where actors greet their audience after a performance, sign a few playbills, answer questions, and foster a relationship with a fan base. A fan base that could be incredibly loyal, keeping the actors in demand for decades, as opposed to Hollywood, where a star is only as good as their last hit. Hence the name of the play, and the writer's attitude towards Hollywood in it, even though both of them made quite a substantial amount of money from said industry. Still, this movie works better than the play because it doesn't lecture, the drama is more fleshed out, and the comedy is razor sharp. There's no romantic entanglements bogging down any of the women's storylines because, as I've discussed, this is not romance. Not even by the 1930s standards. So if you're looking for a distraction from the hellscape our world has become in recent days, go to the experts. You won't be disappointed. Unless you are, in which case you have no joy in your heart and I can't help you. And on that note...
Do you know, I think I could fix you up with Mr. Powell's chauffeur. The chauffeur has a very nice car, too.
Yes, but I understand Mr. Powell's chauffeur doesn't go as far in his car as Mr. Powell does.